Hello friends, and welcome to the Hanged Man in the Moon. If this is your first time here, welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm pleased to meet you. If you've been here before, thank you for returning. I'm truly honored. Friends, if you are a returning visitor, you know that this is my weekly video in a series in which I use tarot and oracle cards to explore topics related to living the intentional life. And before we look at this week's spread, let me ask you a question. What do you think the role or importance of emotion is to living life intentionally? Do you think emotion is the icing on the cake? Or is it perhaps a side dish? To continue the food analogies, perhaps this week's tarot and oracle spread is asking us to consider the possibility that emotion is the main dish in living life intentionally. Is that an interesting thing? Is that something you'd want to hear about? Well, I have a spread all laid out for you. And perhaps you already know this, but the new moon has come and gone, and I have switched out my tarot and oracle decks. So I've got a whole new set of cards waiting for you to dive in with me, to dive into with me, and let's take a look at the cards. These are gorgeous cards, and it's a gorgeous spread, isn't it? Did you notice a theme to it? All of the decks, except for the inquiry cards, used in this spread have a Celtic theme to them. Did you see that? Now, I have some good news for you. Except for the inquiry cards, all of these are mass market decks and easily purchasable. The inquiry cards are not mass market, but they are also very easy to purchase. If you're interested, so as usual, at the end of this video, there will be a short video clip telling you the names of the decks and who created them. And as usual, in the description box below, there will be links so that you can go and get more information about one or more of the decks and perhaps even purchase them. Again, they're all available. So if you use those links, remember, I get no money from them. I'm just giving you the information for your convenience. I suggest going to check them out. Now, I did modify the tarot decks. You'll notice that in the tarot cards, on the tarot cards, there were no names, no titles, nothing. Yeah, I chopped it all off. I chopped them all down to the very, very bare bones. So when you receive the decks from the links, they will have borders, they'll have titles, all of that stuff will be on them. If you want to modify those decks, as I did, I'll try and remember to put a link to a Boho Tarot's channel. Boho Tarot, Dawn Michelle, does wonderful deck mod instruction videos, and she has modified these decks. So if you want to see her modifying these decks to follow along, there'll be information about that too. Just so you know. So we saw the overall spread, and as usual, we had 3 cards in the center, which are from an oracle deck, and these give us the overall theme, the thesis statement for the spread. And around those 3 cards, there were 4 inquiry cards. Remember, the inquiry cards are from an indie deck, and it's still available. So these inquiry cards give us the question, and each one of those questions is answered by 1 card from 2 different tarot decks. So we've got the oracle deck in the center, we've got inquiry cards around, and 2 tarot decks, all working together in this large spread. So as usual, we're going to start with the thesis statement. We'll start with the 3 oracle cards in the center. Let's take a closer look at those. These 3 cards are wonderful. You saw from left to right, we had the Swan, the Water Fairy, and the Serpent. The Swan and the Serpent are animal guides in this deck, and the central card, the Water Fairy, is from Fairy Guides. You'll notice that the Swan and the Serpent were all facing to the right. The Water Fairy actually had her back to us, but was looking over her shoulder, over her left shoulder towards us. So the way I decided to read these cards, rather than reading left to right, I think the central message in this spread is this Water Fairy card. Now it's the message of the Water Fairy. Again, a woman in a pond, perhaps a lotus pond, with flowers in her hair. She's perhaps bathing. And we usually associate water with either the unconscious or our emotions in tarot and oracle decks, So the Water Fairy in this deck is the card of emotions and the element of water. She's here to remind us that we are not our emotions. Can you agree with that? Oftentimes, most of the times, those of us who are English speakers will say things like, I am angry. I am so frustrated. I am thrilled and excited. We use those adjectives as descriptors of who we are. Unfortunately, that association makes us believe that we are our emotions, just as we often think that we are our thoughts. Now, if I have a violent or a very negative thought, that means that I am a violent and negative person. Whereas the truth is, we are the ones observing and experiencing those thoughts and those emotions. Trying to understand or trying to realize that we are not our emotions. We are the ones experiencing the emotions. Those emotions are not descriptors of who we are, but rather descriptors of an experience that we are in them at the time experiencing. Or in the past, I was angry. I will be angry. We can put those emotions into the past and the future as well. But again, we are not the emotion. We are experiencing the emotion. And so for me, I've tried to correct my language a little bit. Rather than saying I am angry, or even I am feeling angry, which is a little bit better than saying I am angry, I am feeling angry. I'm experiencing the feeling of anger. However, when I am the most centered in the middle of my anger, it is possible to be centered in the middle of the experience of anger. I try to describe that as I am experiencing anger. I am in the middle of the experience of anger. Now, would I say that to one of my students in my classes at university? I wouldn't say it that way, no, because then I'd have to explain why I'm saying it in such an odd way. Especially here in using English as a foreign language, that's a whole other level. But when I'm speaking to myself or when I am journaling about myself, I try to remember to clarify the fact that I am the one experiencing this emotion, rather than this emotion describing who I am. We are not our emotions. We shouldn't let them run the show either. Now, what does that mean? We shouldn't let them run the show. Well, a lot of the times we allow ourselves to be limited in one way or the other. We limit the expression of ourselves in one way or the other because of our emotions. Does that make sense to you? I'm so angry that I cannot blah, blah, blah. I can't talk to you right now. I am so angry. I can't do anything. I am so upset. I'm so depressed. Yeah? I can't get out of bed. I'm so depressed. Those are times when we are so associated with our emotions, that we have associated ourselves so strongly with our emotions that we let our emotions run our lives. Now, some of you might right now be thinking, well, okay, then what I'm going to do is I am going to pretend those negative emotions, those unhappy emotions don't exist, and I will paint a happy smile on my face. That is not what I'm saying. Yeah, that is often called spiritual bypassing, toxic positivity. That's not what I'm saying. We don't deny the experience that we're having. We don't try to hide or pretend it isn't there. But we also don't have to let it run the show. We don't have to let our emotions control who we are. If we learn how to separate ourselves from our emotions. Now, there is also a difference between separating ourselves from our emotions and being, it's not disjointed. It's, I'll put the name in the below, yeah? There's a D word, disassociation. Disassociating. We're not disassociating from a reality, for example. We're not disassociating from our emotions. There's a difference. Yeah? Disassociating means that I am no longer part of something. I am not even experiencing something. These things are all out there and they have no effect on me. There's a difference between letting our emotions run the show and disassociating from them. There's a sweet spot in the middle where we are here, we are present. We are experiencing what we're experiencing. However, we are us and the experience is the experience. And we can distinguish between those. That's partially what meditation helps us to do. And it's not the quick process for some of us, for me. Okay, for me, it has not been a quick process. Now, I've gotten some separation there. I'm able to distinguish between me, not me, the eternal being that I am, that is expressing itself through this body, and the experience of emotions. And sometimes I forget. Sometimes I dive right into the emotion without noticing and I drown in it. And I do let the emotion control me, run the show, as I said. But it doesn't have to be the case. And there are times when I'm more successful at being able to distinguish between myself and the experience and not let the experience control me. And that's what this water fairy is here to remind us of. We don't have to be controlled by our emotions. In fact, we can often select our emotions. We can choose the emotions that we are going to head in the direction of. With practice, we may even be able to choose our emotional response more often than not. Think of this. Imagine this. Two people in the very same situation can have very different responses. Even from something as simple as strawberry ice cream. Yeah? Two people, presented with the exact same bowl of strawberry ice cream can have two very different responses. One person could feel joy and the other person could feel anger. For example, me. I don't like strawberry ice cream. And if that were my only option, and I had been promised dessert, I've been promised a wonderful, delicious dessert, and I'm presented with strawberry ice cream, I could be angry. Whereas somebody else could be flooded with joy. But I can choose my emotional reaction. I could look at I, the one who does not like strawberry ice cream, could look at the bowl of ice cream and either get angry or be grateful for being presented with something that the presenter felt was valuable. And be happy with that. Whether I eat the ice cream or not, I could be happy with that. I could choose my response. Have you ever noticed that there are times when you are in similar situations and sometimes those situations, the emotions from the situations seem to just run off you like water off of a duck's back. And other times you just absorb them and Have you noticed that your reactions to similar situations can be different? That can be an indication to us that we can choose our emotional response. And this water fairy is here to remind us of that we can choose our responses. And exercising that choosing muscle would benefit us immensely. She also is here to remind us that we can move like water. Now, just as we can move through the water of our emotions without becoming the water, with that I am I, the emotion is the emotion, I can move through the experience of the emotions without having the water of emotions control me. On the other hand, I can be like water. How am I like water? How can we be like water? Well, what is water? Water is flexible. Water is fluid. Water, when it meets an obstacle, what does it do? Well, it depends, right? If there's a way around, the water flows around with ease. It doesn't stomp its feet in front of the obstacle, demand it vanish, and then in frustration find another way around. It sees the obstacle and moves around without any complaint, without any hesitation, without any friction. It just finds its way. Now, if there's no other way around, what does it do? It stops and it waits until a path reveals itself. That path might be the water building up and moving up and around it, moving up and over it, or finding another course. And the water, again, isn't stomping its feet, demanding the situation change. It finds its way. We can be like water. We can be fluid. We can be flexible. And remember the power of water. Yeah? Water is what carved the Grand Canyon in the United States. Water is what transforms a boulder into many small pebbles over time. We can shift course. We can allow change. We can be flexible. We can be fluid. And the more flexible, the more fluid we are, the more easily we move with the powerful current of intention. Our emotions are also fuel. Our emotions are fuel for manifestation. Does that make sense to you? Now, that the engine that drives us forward with the current of intention is our emotions. And the engine that produces the energetic manifestation of the life we want to live, the relationships we want to have, the experiences we want to have, the things we want to possess, the jobs we want to do, the art we want to create. All of that is fueled by emotion. And it asks us, what kind of fuel are we putting into the engine? Are we putting happy, delighted fuel into our engine? Or are we putting the fuel of anger and frustration into our engine? Because the manifestation from the fuel is going to be different. We want to be sure we want the thing we're going to be creating with the emotion we're feeding into the machine. We also want to remember that our emotions are indicators of how well we are flowing with the powerful current of intention. Yeah, the current's always moving in the direction of the things we want to do, have, be. But we could be open to the power of intention, or we can close ourselves off pretty well. Yeah? Those negative feelings that we have are indications that we have cut ourselves off from our own power. We've cut ourselves off from our own ability to move easily with intention. And the higher emotions, the joy, the love, the gratitude, are indications that we are open to the powerful flow of intention. Emotions truly are key when it comes to living life intentionally. They are the main course of the meal of life. The icing is the manifestation. The side dish is the experience. The main course is the emotion. We came here. Our purpose in these bodies is joy. Does that make sense to you? Does that resonate in some way? Our purpose is joy. Another purpose is freedom. The freedom, openness of moving with intention. Now, on the left side, we have the swan. Now, the swan, a water animal, right? A water animal. Actually, in a way, both of these animals are water animals in different ways. The swan is a water bird. It's a card of transformation in this deck. Transformation from one state to another. Which is interesting because I would not necessarily think of the swan as a transformative animal. However, I think the creator of this deck was perhaps thinking of the transformation of the gosling, not the gosling, what do you call a baby swan? Well, from a baby swan to an adult swan. Now, the baby swan being kind of awkward and not as perhaps pretty. Remember the story of the ugly duckling, right? Yeah, the ugly duckling. There were these little ducklings, and one of them was a little weird looking. So this weird looking duckling was shunned, but it was actually a baby swan, and then the baby swan grows up to be this elegant bird and gets all of the attention, right? Remember that story? So maybe it's because of that we get the idea of transformation from this odd, awkward little creature to this beautiful swan. From one state to another. It's also the card of growth and life changing, because I don't know if you know this, but one of the ways that we manifest, one of the ways that the idea of living life intentionally and this current, this river of intention moving us in the direction of the manifestations that we have placed for ourselves on our current of intention. One of the ways this all works is because as we move forward, we are transforming. We transform into the ones who have the experience of the relationship. We transform ourselves into the ones who have the experience of working in this job or on this creative project. The manifestation occurs because we transform ourselves into the ones who have the experience. And oftentimes, I think we think about it backwards. We think, once I get this thing, I will be happy. Once I begin creating, or I'm in the middle of creating this thing, I will become this. I will become the artist. I will become the lover. I will become the executive. The truth is, we become the lover and then we have the experience. We become the executive and then we have the experience. We transform and then the manifestation appears. And that's what this card is reminding us of as well. It's the emotional journey, and it's also the transformative journey of ourselves becoming the ones who experience the things that we have placed on the current of our intention. It's also the card reminding us that we love the changes. Now, we love the changes of us into who we are becoming. I think a lot of us, from a young age perhaps, were taught that we should be constant, consistent. That change is dangerous. Change is perhaps unacceptable. I was taught by my grandmother that I should never change when I was like 5 or 6 years old. And I took that to heart in a very unhealthy way. So I thought that if I was changed, I was a bad person, because a good person stays the same. Boy, was I wrong. Boy, was I wrong. But still, a lot of us resist the changes that we really want to have to become the people who have the manifestations we want. I want the loving relationship, but I don't want to have to change myself to be in that relationship. Have you heard other people or yourself saying that? We want to love the transformation of ourselves into the new being who has the experience we want. We want to love ourselves through that transformation. And also not thinking that, well, because I'm not that yet, I am somehow less. I am not good enough yet. That's why I don't have it. Yeah. Loving ourselves through the transformation means loving myself as I am now, as I will be 1 second from now, as I will be 10 seconds from now, as I will be 10 years from now. That's loving myself through the transformation, not waiting for the transformation to occur for me to love myself. Do you get that? Yeah? We love ourselves through the transformation. Not resisting it and not depreciating ourselves because we haven't achieved it. We also want to trust our intuition. Yeah, and this card is also here to remind us of that. These cards are deep. Yeah, the Swan card, transformation, loving ourselves through the transformation. And now intuition, trusting our intuition. Because we see through the heart. We see through our emotions. Our intuition is linked to, it's unable to be separated from, it's integral to our emotions. Now, our emotions and our intuition, they're all part of the same stuff, if you will. So we want to listen. We want to listen to our emotional experience as well. That's why things like spiritual bypassing or toxic positivity don't work. Because they're ignoring the emotions that are trying to teach us. And we listen to our emotions. We listen to them and try to glean the information that they're showing us. be they happy emotions or not so happy emotions. And we listen not so much with our ears, but we listen with spirit. We listen from the essence of who we are. Remembering that the emotion is the experience. So who we are is the one who is having the experience. The one who has experienced the emotion is the one listening to the emotion, listening through the emotion for the information that is being revealed with the emotion. And that's what the Swan card is here to show us, to remind us of. And now we have the Serpent. Now, I said both of these animals were in some way water animals. Yeah, we got the water bird, the swan. Now, the snake, usually we think of almost all snakes as being land animals, right? But the snake is one of the symbols of Scorpio, which is my ascending sign, my ascendant. Now, we've got the scorpion, right? We've got the snake, and we've got the phoenix, or the eagle, and then we've got the phoenix. Yeah? All of them are water elements. So the serpent is here to remind us of. Now, when I see a serpent, my first thought is transformation. Yeah? But that's the Swan card for this deck. In this deck, the serpent is the card of healing. And we can think of the snake going up the scepter of the medical symbol, right? Now the serpent, an animal for healing, an animal for gained knowledge as well. The serpent reminds us to ask questions of the knowledgeable, as in addition, yeah? The serpent reminds us to ask questions, to get information from people who know. We don't have to expect that we will know everything easily. We have access to knowledge, certainly. We have access to knowledge from our unconscious. We have access to knowledge from the divine, from the infiniteness of ourselves, from the divine creating spirit. But sometimes it's a little difficult to interpret that information with our humanly focused brains, right? And at those times, it's very good to ask people who know and to get information from other people and from books and from sometimes YouTube videos. And that's the snake. The snake is also success. Yeah? Success, being sure to follow the advice that we get. If we get advice from someone else, from some other source, and we accept it, we want to be sure to follow it. And the snake is here to remind us of that. It's also to remind us that we can heal ourselves of our wounds. Now, remembering that we probably all still have some wounds that are causing us suffering. And again, we don't want to paint a smiley face over it and try and ignore it. We want to investigate our wounds, and we want to heal our wounds so that we can carry the information of the healing forward with us and let the wound itself, the events, the experiences that caused the wounds, to drift into the past rather than lug them with us to the end of time. And that healing is also the snake, because we think of the snake as the one who sheds their skins. And so that's part of it. Yeah, as we heal from the wounds, we shed the skin that had covered us up and protected us when we were wounded. We can shed that and come out fresh, new, shiny beings. Become new, like the snake. So, what did we get from this set of 3 cards? Just a brief overview. We've got our emotions. Our emotions fuel our manifestations. They also indicate how well we're moving with the flow of our intention. And they're also here to remind us to be, not there, the water element is also here to remind us to be like water, move around obstacles, be flexible, be fluid. The swan is here to remind us to transform, to enjoy the transformation process, to love ourselves through transformation, because transformation of ourselves is how we manifest. But we don't want to be critical of our not having transformed yet, because that causes wounds. And the serpent is here to remind us that we can shed our wounds through a healing process and become new. We can learn from people who are knowledgeable, sources that provide information. And we can grow, and we can heal, and we can, again, transform. And that's living the intentional life in a large nutshell. So friends, we've got 4 sets of questions to this central thesis. And let's move on to that first question. So the first question is, what moves me? Perfect question, right? We were talking about water and water moving just a while ago. And so what moves me? And you see these 2 cards, right? One of them, none of them have titles, remember. I chopped those titles off. I chopped off all the borders and all the titles. So in the card on the left, we had a woman with a skull. Did you see that? Did you notice the sickle hanging from the woman's right arm? Now she's standing in front of a cauldron, holding the skull, perhaps even caressing the skull. And out the window, in the air, there were birds flying through the air. And can you guess what card this is in this deck? Maybe not. Maybe not. This is the death card. Believe it or not, this is the death card. Now don't worry, don't freak out. I'm not saying, this card is not saying you're gonna die or I'm gonna die. Well, this is not a prediction card, okay? Oh, nor is it saying that you have to die in order to do whatever you have to do. Yeah, that's not what this card represents. So calm down. The death card is not so scary. And right next to the death card, we had a very kingly looking person sitting in frothy water. Yeah, this king's throne is in the froth of the sea. And this is the King of Cups. Probably you could have picked that out already. Now the King of Cups. So we've got death and the King of Cups. And let's start with death. Yeah? Again, this crone-like figure, and I don't like the word crone personally, but I'll use it here. The crone-like figure is almost caressing that skull before the crone places the skull in the cauldron for transformation. Yes, this is a card for transformation in this deck. Well, in most Rider-Waite-Smith based decks, this is the card of transformation, but it's also the card of endings. It's a card of endings. It's a card for change and transformation and transition. It can also be a card of harvesting. Also, mortality and suffering. But I don't think mortality and suffering are the meanings for the card here in this place at this time. So what moves me is not, okay, I stand corrected. I stand corrected. Let's go through these step by step. And I'll get to where I say, why I said I stand corrected. So let's start with endings. What moves me? Endings can move me. Endings can move you, I imagine, too. There are times when something ends, like a relationship ends, and we sink down to our knees, we crumble, and we become immobile for a time. That time could be an hour, it could be a day, it could be a week, it could be a month, it could be a year. So there could be a time when an ending causes immobility, or we allow ourselves to become immobile because of the experience of an ending. I'm not going to say that the ending caused us to be immobile. Our reaction, the reaction that we choose to the ending, is to crumple, to give up our energy. And that's okay, it's okay. I'm not saying you're a bad person or I'm a bad person when that happens. That's not the point here. The point is to remember that we have made the choice at some level to react in that way. And that other people react in different ways. Some people come to an ending and they get frenetic. They become hyperactive. I just saw a story recently of a person who had narrowly avoided death, and that person got hyperactive because they came out of that near-endedness experience and they couldn't look at it. So to distract themselves, their reaction was to become hyperactive, become not stop, to do. That's another reaction. Now, is that better than not moving at all? I'm not so sure. And sometimes stopping is the way for us to actually absorb what has happened. Not absorb it to become it, but to absorb the information and to really be able to look at who we are now, where we are now, what the environment is right now. Sometimes it takes a moment, however long that moment lasts, to really evaluate who we are, where we are, when we are. And that's okay. And that can be part of this death card, that endedness. But after that evaluation, we start moving again. In one direction or another, we start moving again. So the endings move us eventually. Change, transformation, transition moves us. Transition is movement, right? Transformation is movement. And change can move us as well. How about suffering? Suffering can move us as well. And in fact, that might be one of the very few benefits of suffering. Also of pain. Let's go to a very rudimentary metaphor. Hot stove, hand. Place hand on hot stove. The pain makes us move, right? Or when I had my experience of a pinched nerve, very bad pinched nerve, it meant morphine could not kill it. At least the morphine that they were giving me in the hospital could not deaden the pain of this pinched nerve. It was ever present when it was there. And it was interesting because for the first 24 hours of that pain, when it really, I don't want to give you my whole medical history, but the pain grew over a period of several days, maybe a week or more. But there was this point when suddenly it changed. And I can pinpoint that moment. It was a moment when I was standing up from a seated position, and then suddenly the entire universe changed. Pain. And that pain grew over the next 24 hours until I could not go to the hospital. So then I went to the hospital. And that next 24 hours was very interesting. It was very painful, yes, but it was very interesting. I noticed my body doing things because of the pain that were very surprising and interesting to me. In the midst of this pain, I was surprised by what my body was doing. And one of the things my body was doing, I noticed, My eyes were shifting back and forth, and like they were looking for an escape. Like they were looking for a way to run away from the pain. And I noticed the rest of my body preparing to run. I wasn't able to run. I wasn't able to move, but it was like the parts of my body that were preparing to run for it when the opportunity presented itself, when a door opened for me to run through. So, pain, yes, and suffering can be the cause for movement, can make us want to run away from it. And that perhaps is one aspect of the death card. Yeah? The suffering, pain, can cause us to want to move away from whatever is causing that pain or suffering. But that's not the only reason the card is here. The card is also here to remind us that transformation, the more positive aspect of death, transformation is the instigation for movement for us. And best case scenario, that is what this card is here to remind us of. Then we have the King of Cups. Again, we've got this king figure. We're going to call this king a non-gendered king, a female king, a male king, a non-binary king, whatever. Yeah? A non-gendered king figure is seated in their throne in the midst of this turbulent water. And this card is the card of, first, balanced emotions, staying emotionally balanced in the midst of perhaps emotional turmoil. Have you ever been around somebody who is able to do that? Remain calm in the midst of chaos, emotional chaos. Remain centered and grounded in the midst of upheaval, whether it's joyful or angry or frightful or excited. The one who's able to remain calm in the midst of emotional turmoil. That's the King of Cups. Emotionally balanced, but also compassionate. Not the one who's grounded and centered seeming because they're actually really just cold and unfeeling. No, that's not the King of Cups. The King of Cups is also compassionate at the same time. The King of Cups is caring. So, when we are in the experience of emotional turmoil, whether it's an internal experience of emotional turmoil or an external experience of emotional turmoil, and we recognize that we are the ones who are grounded, who are balanced in the midst of this turmoil. We are being the King of Cups. We are recognizing our King of Cupsedness. And it's from that place that we are best able to move, to empathize, to care for, to be compassionate for, with those around us. Because compassion doesn't mean that we have to mirror their emotions to have the same emotions with them. We don't have to suffer along with the suffering people in order to be compassionate for their suffering. And in fact, the most helpful stance is not to suffer along with them or along with ourselves. The most helpful stance is to be present to the suffering. Not needing to change it, not needing to fix it so much as to be present to it. And that's compassion. That's true compassion. Allowing ourselves to be present to the suffering of ourselves or others. And that is the King of Cups. And that can move us into action or move us into stillness. the absolute stillness of presence to someone else's experience. And that can be absolutely transformative for us and for the other. When that presence is pure and open. I have a professor from graduate school who does volunteer work at a hospice. And the essence of her work in hospice is presence. Being present with. And service. But the essence of her work there is presence. The service is, again, the icing on the cake. Bringing meals to the patients. Reading for the patients. Chatting with the patients. Those are the icing. The main course of her volunteer work, of her action, of her being in that hospice environment is her presence. And that moves her to do when doing is appropriate. And it moves her to listen when listening is appropriate. And it moves her to stillness when stillness is appropriate. And that's the King of Cups. So friends, we've got this idea of being moved by transformation and by emotional stability and presence. And we have a second card. We have a second question to explore. Let's look at that one. The next question is, what do I need? Now, frankly, I don't like this question very much because the idea of need, I don't think, is compatible with the intentional life. We don't need things. We have desires for things, but when we get into need, we realize that we have we have reduced our access to the powerful current of intention. Yeah, need is a very resistant state. We can want, we can desire things openly. But when we get into I need things, we've already started to clamp down. So I don't particularly like this question very much. However, we're going to go with it because we're like water. We can flow with it and be flexible. So what do I need? 2 cards. The Queen of Swords, perfect card. Yeah, you noticed her on the left. Her cloak blowing in the air. She's got her sword up there in front of her face. She's facing to the right by our perspective, our right. Again, the wind is blowing her hair. The wind is blowing her beautiful cloak. And right next to her, what do we have? We've got another queen. We've got the Queen of Pentacles. Usually one of my favorite cards on the deck. Now, the Queen of Pentacles. And you see this queen, again, non-gendered queen. Non-gendered queen alert, just like we had the non-gendered king. Now the non-gendered queen. This male queen, female queen, non-binary queen. So, the Queen of Pentacles. Seated in nature, the glory of nature. Now there's a tree behind the queen. There's plant life all around the queen. Gorgeous, gorgeous environment. We'll get to that in just a moment. So let's start with the Queen of Swords. One of my favorite queens too. Okay, I like all the queens. I'll just say it. I love all the queens. And it's interesting that we've got 2 queens here coming up to answer the same question. I need my queens. I need my Queen of Air and my Queen of Earth. Often seen as diametrically opposed queens. Well, elements, earth and air. Just like fire and water, earth and air are seen by many as diametrically opposed elements. They could be on a spectrum, perhaps. And if they are on a spectrum, we could see that they are actually connected, inextricably connected to each other. But we've got the Queen of Swords and the Queen of Pentacles or discs. And did you notice that they're also facing each other? They're facing each other. There's a connection. We've got a connection right there in these two cards. The Queen of Swords is the independent thinker, the independent mind. One that doesn't need to follow anybody else's thoughts, ideas, conventions. This queen is able to think for the queen's self. Unbiased. Unbiased judgment. Yeah? Which is often, could be part of that Justice card from the Major Arcana, moved into the Court cards, for me. Now the Justice card, unbiased judgment. She's also the card of clear boundaries. I said she. The Queen is also the card of clear boundaries and direct communication. This Queen tells it like it is. Speaks truth, truth to power, and truth to powerless as well. This is the astute, the brainy queen, yeah? The high achieving queen. The scholarly queen. And also the one with the sense of humor, if you ask me. Of all the court cards, if one of them has a sense of humor, it's going to be the Queen of Swords for me. Yeah, might be a little sharp, might be a little scathing, kind of like, do you know Dorothy Parker? Dorothy Parker, from like the early 1920s, 1930s, Algonquin Club in New York. She was a dynamo of satire and irony. So, total Queen of Swords embodied person, for me. Yeah, the Queen of Swords, independent thinker, humor, satire, clever. Right next to her, we've got the Queen of Pentacles, often seen as the embodiment of the Empress in the court cards. Now, nurturing, charitable, nature in being, and noble in being. Now, the nobility of the landed gentry, maybe. This is a queen who appreciates what they have and can share what they have, can nurture others with what they have. It doesn't have to be someone with an estate and with 40 acres of shooting, for example. But the queen's estate, whatever size that is, appreciates the estate that the queen has, whether it's a one-room apartment in the Lower East Side of Manhattan or a shack in the middle of the steppes of some country, or it's a large house in Beverly Hills, or a mansion in the Alps, a chalet in the Alps, whatever that queen's estate is, the queen appreciates the estate that the queen has, the space, the resources that the queen has, and knows how to use those resources to nurture those around her, around them. Because this queen is also very practical. The queen knows what to do with what they have. And opulence, feeling of opulence with the resources that are available to the queen. One can feel opulence on any budget. Whether it's going out and making a necklace from what you find in nature, to going out and finding a necklace in what you find in Tiffany's on Fifth Avenue. The experience of opulence does not need to be directly related to one's financial statements. So, we've got these two queens facing each other, not facing off, but facing each other in recognition of both being ends of a spectrum that is a beautiful spectrum. From independent thought to independent action, perhaps, yeah? Thinking independently and nurturing others. And that's what I want for myself. I want to embody both aspects, my Queen of Swords and my Queen of Pentacles, my nurturing side and my independent side of boundaries. I want both for the fullness of who I am. Have you experienced both aspects of both queens in your own life? If you have you noticed how well they can balance each other out? Because they certainly can balance each other out and bring fullness to our lives. So, we've got a third question all lined up. Let's hop over to that third question. The third question, what am I ready for, is very interesting. And we've got two cards. The one on the left actually confused me when I first pulled it, because I'm still a little bit new to this deck now that I've trimmed off all of the information. When I first saw this card, my first thought was the Emperor. But it's not the Emperor, it's actually the King of Wands. Which, once I realized that, I thought, oh, duh, of course it's the King of Wands, it's not the Emperor. The king has got this big old wand in their hands. And again, non-gendered king, yeah? Woman king, man king, non-binary king, it's all there. The King of Wands. And then right next to the King of Wands, we have the Four of Cups, which was a little bit surprising because I often think of the Four of Cups in a little bit, not entirely negative, but just a little bit negatively. So, Rider-Waite-Smith, Four of Cups, not the Tarot de Marseille Four of Cups. That's an entirely different conversation. Does not need to be had here. Moving right back into the King of Wands. What am I ready for? Well, did you notice we had 4 court cards? This is the last court card in this spread. Yeah? 2 of them queens, 2 of them kings. We had a cup, a sword, a pentacle, and now a wand. So beautifully balanced. So beautifully balanced. And beautifully balanced in another way too. Yeah? Cups and pentacles are usually thought of as the more receptive, stereotypically feminine, but I don't like that qualification, the more receptive cards or more receptive suits. And the swords and the wands are considered the more active, traditionally male. I don't like thinking of them that way, but the more active suits. So the first king was cup, a receptive king. The next one was a queen, an active queen. The next one was a queen, a receptive queen. And now we have a king, an active king. So we had an active and a receptive king. We had an active and a receptive queen. I mean, this spread was just beautifully balanced in so many ways. So, the King of Wands. We have a natural born leader. We have someone with grand visions. Now, it's a little different from the King of Swords, who has clear vision. Yeah, being able to see clearly, see the landscape, see far. This is the one of grand visions. Yeah, the one who sees potentials and possibilities and creativity, the grand vision of creativity, of creation. It's also the card of long-term success. Yeah, the wand suit is the card of success and going out there and doing stuff, to me. Now, sometimes the King of Wands is demanding. Yeah, the King of Wands can be demanding and a little bit of a prick sometimes. Sorry, girl pricks too, but can be a little bit of a nuisance, because the King of Wands has expectations and expects those expectations to be met. Also noble. Yeah, the King of Wands is noble, especially in their passions, has noble passions. The Queen of Pentacles is noble in being, in the essence of the material. The King of Wands is noble in their passions. Their passions are noble passions of doing good, of being good, of doing magnificent things for themselves and for people. Nobly. Also, a very honest king. The King of Wands has no need for deception, because there's so much confidence there in their nobility. Nobility and confidence is honest. And that's one thing I'm ready for. I'm ready to be a leader, perhaps of my own life, but perhaps for other people as well. I'm ready to allow myself grand visions for my life, and perhaps for those around me as well. I'm ready to allow myself success, and perhaps success for those around me as well. Now, the kings for me are leaders in some way. They gather other people together and lead those people forward with them. So perhaps we are ready to be the leaders as well, as we move with our flow of intention. We're also ready for the Four of Cups. Now, the Four of Cups, it's odd because it's usually turning attention inwards, yeah, away from the external. In this card, what did we see? We see 3 cups that have been knocked over. There's one up in the tree above looks like a young person dressed in young girl's clothes. Perhaps that's what it looks like to me. What does it look like to you? Turning attention inward. This person had their arms around their knees, and their attention is inward. They're not noticing the cup above them being offered by either the divine or by a tree spirit. The card of turning away from external distractions, introspection, perhaps reflection, contemplation. And in that sense, there's a very positive aspect to this card, yes? A lot of people look at the Four of Cups and think of disappointment, boredom, maybe ennui. But it can be reflection and contemplation and introspection. So maybe we're also ready for that. We've got this very externally driven King of Wands, but we've also got this Four of Cups being ready to look within, to examine our interior landscape, waterscape. It can be a card of reevaluation, perhaps due to past disappointments, but not necessarily due to disappointment. Yeah? The cups on the ground could be disappointing because they were maybe knocked over, or we were dissatisfied with them, or we could have drunk them and now they're empty, and we could be a little disappointed that we've extracted what we could from them. Not noticing that the next cup is already being offered to us. But perhaps we need that moment of reflection after having drunk all of that wine. Not so much in, I'm done with this, but I've done this. I can't do it anymore because I've done this. So, what has that meant for me? What does that make me? Who am I now that I have done this? Or I have experienced this? So it could be that balance, yeah? The king, the fiery, passionate, grand visions, long-term success, and the Four of Cups also taking time to reflect, investigate within. Because if it's all the exterior driven King of Wands, it'll burn itself out. Having a nice balance with some water can sustain the fire, can contain the fire within manageable limits, so the fire doesn't burn up, explode, and then die. Now, it maintains the fire, it contains the fire. And having time to reflect, to consider, to introspect, as we are also the masters of our passions, both that water and that fire can feed each other. Can you see how that's possible? And that's what we're ready for, perhaps. That's what we are transforming into. Now, we've got a fourth question here. Let's take a look at that. The fourth question, again, I don't like the word. What needs to change? Nothing needs to change, right? Yeah, nothing needs to change. Everything can be as it is because that's the only thing it can be. Demanding that what is be different right now is lunacy. Nothing needs to change. However, we do want to transform. And I think that's what this is really trying to say. What do we want? How do we want to transform? How do we want to, or what areas do we want to look to for transformation? And it's interesting. We got two cards. The card on the left, for you, I think it's the left as well. Did you recognize which card that is? Even without the titles, did you notice what that card is? It's similar to the Rider-Waite-Smith. Similar, not the same. Yeah? Was the Nine of Wands. In the Rider-Waite-Smith, you've got 8 wands in the background. We've got a figure with a bandaged head, perhaps a little bit bloody, leaning on the 9th wand, and that's the Nine of Wands. Here, we've got the 8 wands in front of the figure, kind of pointing in the direction of perhaps an enemy, and the figure is still holding on to the 9th wand, yeah, still kind of bandaged up. Instead of the hand, it's the head. The bandage was around the arm. It was like a sling. Yeah, this figure is also kind of beaten up, but still standing. That's the point of this card: beaten up, but still standing. Yeah? I'm still standing, better than I ever did. Yeah, I'm still standing. Okay, moving on to the card on the right was perhaps difficult to recognize. If you know this deck, you already know it. But if you don't, just looking at the image might be difficult to recognize what that is. And that is the Judgment card. Now, in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, we've got an angel above blowing a horn and figures, usually 3, maybe 4, rising up from the tombs, back to us, stark naked. But here we've got a very different image, and we'll look at that image in more depth in just a moment. Let's start off with the Nine of Wands, because this is, I think, what is the main answer to the question, what needs to change, but what do we want to transform? The Nine of Wands, what is that? That is the card of resilience, the card of courage, the card of perseverance. What's wrong with those? Nothing's wrong with them in truth. Nothing's really wrong with resilience. Nothing's wrong with courage. Nothing's wrong with persistence. Oh, I said perseverance, didn't I? Persistence is actually the word I really wanted to say. Persistence. However, you notice in this card, this figure is looking forward, and in front of this figure, there is a wall of 8 picards, perhaps spears, pointing away from them, probably to ward off an enemy, but this figure has blocked their path forward. Now, this is a card also of defensiveness and protectiveness. Now, is that a bad thing? No, it's not a bad thing. It's definitely not a bad thing. There are times when we want to defend ourselves. Yeah? Survival. Self-survival is self-defense. Survival is important. We want to stay alive. Of course, there is no death, ultimately. Yeah? But we like being in these bodies that we're co-creating, and we want to continue co-creating these bodies that we're in because we enjoy, hopefully, the human experience that we're having. And so it is good and proper to protect ourselves physically, definitely, emotionally. Now, if there's an emotional attack launched against us, we have the right to emotionally defend ourselves, to put up a barricade. That's fine. That's fine. Protecting ourselves is fine. However, it's not how we want to live our lives. Having boundaries is okay. But when those boundaries turn into barricades and walls, for a short time, they may be necessary. But when that time has passed and we keep those walls up, then we are causing ourselves harm. We are starting to starve ourselves, period. We begin to starve ourselves and we begin to stagnate. And that's what we want to transform. We want to be able to come out from behind our protections, come out from behind our defensive stance, to move past that. When we are ready, when it is appropriate, when we are strong enough to do so. And again, if we're not strong enough to do so, if we haven't healed well enough, if we're not past the danger that has presented itself, which we responded to, perhaps very properly, by constructing defenses, when that danger has passed, then we want those walls to come down. Because we're not moving with the powerful current of our intention if we're ensconced in our towers, if we're barricaded within our fortresses. Now, we want to be able to move out, back out into an open stance of vulnerability. Not so much opening ourselves to attack. It's not like we see somebody rushing at us with a knife and we say, now I'm going to be vulnerable. That's not what I'm talking about. It's when the danger is past. When we've established safe ground again, then we open up the walls and we allow ourselves to be vulnerable again. Because that's when we're open, and that's when we are taking advantage of the power of intention and moving in the direction of what we want, the loves we want to experience, the art we want to create, the homes we want to manifest, the jobs we want to work at, the vacations we want to go on, whatever. So we want to transform past our barriers, past our protections, into the judgment card. Because when we're barricaded within those walls that we've constructed for our own defense, remember, I'm not criticizing the walls. We're looking at whether they should be there in perpetuity. And if they are there without being removed, we're not going to be able to move into the next card, the judgment card. And in this card, what do we see? We see a tomb. We see a cavernous tomb. And we see two figures lying, dead bodies, basically. Very beautifully dressed dead bodies, certainly. But two dead bodies. One looks like a male, one looks like a female, perhaps a king and a queen. We see the bodies, but then you see in the light streaming in from the hole in the wall, perhaps the mouth of the cave, the mouth of the dungeon. We see the light streaming in, and in that light streaming in, we see the same two figures in the distance walking off into the light. Go into the light. So it can be judgment. Yeah, the judgment card can actually be judgment. Yeah, being called to judgment for actions past, both good and bad. For some people, there is that. But it's also the card of rebirth and awakening. It's the card of the inner calling, hearing the call of the divine, hearing the call of the eternal nature that we are, hearing the call for spiritual reawakening and spiritual realization, otherwise known as enlightenment. Now we're being called towards enlightenment, towards self-actualization, in the terms of, what's his name? His name is Masner? It starts with an M, okay? It'll probably come to me in just a moment. But in psychological terms, yeah, it's the call to self-actualization. Or in Jung's terms, individuation. So, we are called. What do we want to transform? How do we want to transform and change? We want to come out from behind our self-constructed barriers and protections so that we can hear the call to our own enlightenment, to our own spiritual realization, to our own rebirth and awakening from the death of the protected state. And you notice we started out with death of transformation, and here we are back at transformation. Now, how did we get here? We started out with the 3 oracle cards, right? We have the 3 oracle cards of the water fairy. Emotions are important, our transformation, learning knowledge, healing, yeah, being subtle and flexible like water. And what moves me was death, the transformation, and my own presence and stability, emotional stability, and being able to be present with others. So then what do I want? What do I want? I want to balance myself between my Queen of Swords, my Queen of Pentacles, my independent thinking, my caring and nurturing of others, among other things. And so what am I ready for? When I get that balance kind of there. Now, what am I ready for? I'm ready for another balance. I'm ready for the balance of grand visions, my passions, leading others, And also introspection and reflection and examining who I am, where I am, and what I'm doing. And examining my emotions. How are my emotions playing while I'm being this King of Wands? And so what needs to change? What do I want to transform? Again, I want to transform. I want to come out from beyond my barriers, my walls, and hear the call of myself, my eternal self, to my potential, to the fullness of who I can be, my self-actualization, my individuation, the call to my enlightenment, my epiphanies, my inner calling, my being the purpose that I have created for myself. All of that. And so that's how this spread is played out. Beautifully, I think. Now, there's one question I'm drawing out of this spread from this Nine of Wands. How do I get from the Nine of Wands to Judgment? How do I move beyond those walls that I have put up for my protection? How do I move beyond protectiveness and defensiveness? And I'm going to answer that question with Tarot de Marseille in another video. So if you're curious about that video, subscribe to my channel and hit the alarm bell so you know when I upload videos. Yeah, hit the like button if you found value in this video and if you found that this made you think about how you are being on your path of intentional life. And also share this with somebody who you think might get benefit from it. I'd love to see people get exposure to this. And comment below. I'd love to hear from you. What do you think? Has this brought any thoughts or emotions up for you? Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? I'd love to engage with you. So friends, if you're interested in a reading, a personal reading, I'm opening myself up for that. So I'll put a link to my Instagram account. You can go over there and send me a direct message saying I'd like a reading, and we can work something out. Yes. So friends, that was the spread. In just a moment, again, there will be a short video clip giving you the names of the decks and the creators. And again, there are links below. And friends, now, as always, I wish you love, joy, well-being, and pure awareness. Thank you.